Okay, and this is just sorry for the recording. This is Rosemarie Lohnes from Helping Nature Heal speaking.
Thanks so much, Bob, for that introduction. So my name is Rosmarie Lohnes. I'm here in Bridgewater, down on the South Shore. I'm sure many of you are familiar. I come to Nova Scotia from Northern Ontario. I grew up in a little mining town north of Sudbury, watched nature be um, deconstructed by the mining companies since I was a small child. And I think my very first notion that I was an environmentalist was when I made the connection between getting a new bike at about age 8, which I was begging desperately for. And my parents in the 70s, of course, were on strike a lot. Inco was the big mega company of the North without a ton of safety regulations or care for their employees, unfortunately. So the employees went on strike a fair amount. And so I made a connection while my dad was working midnight shift, and I really wanted this new bike. And after about a year or two of whining, he pounded his fist on the table and said, "Well, all right, then I'll just pick up some more shifts." And I realized that the money that bought our food and clothing and the things that we needed came from the mining. It really made the connection for me that if we needed more things, he would have to work more at the mine. And the mine was responsible for taking down the nature around the community where I lived. And in my little innocent, naive brain, made that link and said, I don't want the bike. And so I didn't get a new bike, although I had been wanting it for desperately for so long. I was the smallest of all the cousins and the siblings and whatnot, so I had lots of hand-me-downs, and I just wanted this new bike so badly. But it it really got me to realize, and I think from that point forward, I've always been looking out for nature first, realizing that it is the nature that supports us, our breath, our food, our water, healthy minds and bodies. It all is because of our access to nature. So as I went through my education, went to architecture school first, thinking that I would build homes that were, connecting people to nature. That career path didn't quite figure out for me. So, as a young adult, I went back to university and studied conservation and environmental studies at York University in Toronto. And it was there that I really was able to explore and research and study. And my specialty was in ecological restoration. And I ended up becoming to Nova Scotia in 99. I was due to be here for 3 months for an internship, and I stayed for 14. I fell in love with the program that I was taking at Windhorse Farm. I don't know if any of you know about Windhorse Farm or not. Yeah, I see Bob at least is nodding his head. So I came for the ecoforestry thinking that I was going to head back to Northern Ontario and rescue the forest and rebuild it. And, I was going to make a big difference in my life. And I stayed for 14 doing the seed to seed program that was under Margaret Drescher's tutorial. And I learned so much those 14 months. It was quite great. I also learned that I loved the ocean and I loved being able to be in the forest 1 minute and 20 minutes later be on the seaside. And the ocean, of course, has such a different type of energy than lakes and rivers that I was used to growing up around that I really decided that I was going to stay here. So, 2001, I was looking for work in my field, couldn't find a job, so decided that I was going to start my own company called Helping Nature Heal. And I was going to put boots to the ground and do the things that I had been hoping I would do all of my life. And so at 30, I started the company, and here we are today, 23 years later, um, doing every day the things that I love and that impassions me, and that I'm excited to get out of bed every day. So this is the result of these 23 years of consistent hard work following your goals and dreams. And I'll just give you a little taste today of what Helping Nature Heals all about, in hopes that we can inspire you, but also that if you need a resource in your life for this such a thing, I hope that you'll connect with us. So we'll go to the next slide, please. Okay, great. So these are some of the partners we've worked with over the years. There's many more than that. We've done a lot of research work at Acadia University, at St. Mary's, at Dalhousie, and as well as Lambton College back in Ontario, in Sarnia. And we'll talk about some of that research as we go through the slides. So it's just nice to see we are collaborative workers. Even though our company is a for-profit business, we often are linking ourselves with NGOs who are doing great work in the field that we are, or in properties that adjoin to some of our private clients, or we're being hired by municipalities to do some restoration work for them. So yeah, we are a sustainability partner of the Ecology Action Center. We are monthly donors at the Nova Scotia Nature Trust. And then some of these other partners in New Brunswick are ones that we work with fairly regularly on issues of coastal issues, climate change, sea level rise, and how we're meant to adapt to these in this new era of awareness around our climate. So restoration to us, here's me just walking through a meadow that we are in a restoration pathway with. It's not complete yet, but we have what we call the Lohnes method. And if you've checked out our website, there's a video of me paddling a canoe on my land and down the river that is runs through my land. And for me, the Lohnes method is really bringing the heart and soul into our land care stewardship initiatives. It's about employing people and making sure that we're using people over machinery. And so that machines are always our last choice. We have a very strict fossil fuel mandate here at Helping Nature Heal, to the point that our staff carpool to the office, and then we take the crew trucks or the crew vehicles out to job sites, so we don't end up with 5 or 6 vehicles running in the same direction. It was one of my pet peeves for sure when I first started working, that you would arrive on a job site and the carpenters were there, and there was 10 pickup trucks clogging up the driveway, and I couldn't get my dump trucks in with soil or get the plant load in on the van or whatnot. So yeah, it started off really early that people come to our office at our home base in Bridgewater, and then we ferry everyone out in the crew vehicles that are also fossil fuel for now, but the hope is that we'll be able to go electric at some point. So we'll see that. We work really consciously on caring for the soil, caring for the land first, the plants, the critters that have to live there that we hope will come back and make homes in our new landscapes. So everything is very scientifically generated within our office. We have a research team. We really want to make sure that we're doing the best we possibly can for the ecosystem as a complete sentence. You know, it's not just about the humans' aesthetics appeals or their dreams and wishes for their land, but also about the critters that are currently there. We often look into, well, what's missing? What plants or critters are we actually missing on this landscape? And so working diligently to try to recover that and to bring those connectors back into place. We love native plants, of course, and we realize that more and more of our invasive species are moving around. And so We're often tasked with removing invasive plants or problematic plants, and then trying to restore or recover a landscape once that hard work has been done. So very tricky, but we can make it work out. And then, of course, we're looking to the habitat components to try to develop the design so that it's really about bringing that environmental activation back into play so that so the humans understand that they're not necessarily the most important thing, that they're part of it, a part of the big puzzle, but we do not mow lawns or put in solid stone patios or things like that. So sometimes we're just not the right fit for certain folks or certain projects. But that's okay with us because we really want to do the best we can every day. And the best means for the ecosystem as a whole, as an entirety. So, why native species? I mean, you all know this more probably than I do, even that we we really need those plants as they co-evolved with the critters that pollinate them, but also for their altruistic needs as well. So the animals and the plants work together. And when I'm talking to a group like yourselves, I often think I'm missing, I have so much to learn from you all as well. And so it's not just about these bullet points about being good for the climate, good for the animals, providing shelter and all the stuff of life for these critters, but there's also this other kind of pull from the soul that it's really the right thing to do, um, and that if we want to keep the plants of the Acadian forest here, and as we watch the climate change and shift, there's sort of this longing that I want to be able to protect them all. And I know that that's impossible, and some of them will have to move on or they will perish. And so, yeah, I don't want to create zoos or museums of plants and landscapes, but rather have living ecosystems that the humans who live there are so deeply embedded in the design and the purpose and the sort of experience of restoration that it becomes part of their lifestyle, that it's just becomes daily interaction with these plants that they're harvesting and eating and using medicines and whatnot, that they're really connected to this ecosystem that supports their life and the good of the common. So there's those underlying almost unknowns that are driving us to make sure that we're doing the best we can to protect the soil ecosystem. But then all the other parts of that puzzle need to be really well thought through and taken very seriously, of course. So yeah, it's important for us. This picture is one that you've probably see more frequently than we want to, where a piece of land has been developed, probably for a new house to go on, and they've clear cut right to the property line. And then, for me, this is quite frequent where the clients will kind of come back and the developer will say, oh, well, we had to take those extra ones down. We didn't have room for the gear or whatnot. And I'm just cringing as I even look at this photo here, because we had such beautiful trees on that land before the developer moved in. So it's really heartfelt and it's very painful sometimes, but the joy of seeing the birds come back, the soil being healthy and able to compensate for loss of plant life and then start to regain, and the volunteers show up, from the seed bank. Those are the best days when we see those kinds of things happening. So I know that it can happen, and it doesn't mean that as humans we should destroy or harm things just because we can repair. I think repair and restore are tricky words as well, because we can never actually go back to what it was like, right? When we are restoring to a certain point. Yeah, there's always something missing out of that puzzle. So I'm sure as many of you have tried to cultivate certain plants and things, sometimes they just don't work out. And so there's something magical that's missing when an ecosystem gets taken apart like that. And I often think of us as sort of the maestro or the orchestrator trying to put all the pieces back together again. And there's one little tiny piece missing, whether that's a mycorrhizae or a bird or a seed or some very specific plant. It seems challenging to get it perfect and back to the way it was. So I think we're always in practice in that regard. So we are merely slowing erosion in some of our cases. We spent an awful lot of time on the shore because this seems to be, since we're maritime region, most of the climate changes and challenges are showing up on the shoreline. So sometimes our work looks like this, and it's where someone has put up a rock wall to protect their land, so they think. And what happens is the energy is just passed along to the neighbors. And so at the end of the rock walls, we often have a large void or a scouring out of soils. Erosion, of course, is one of the main issues here in the Maritimes, since we're all primarily coastal. Most of us in Nova Scotia are only 60 kilometers away from the water. Coastal also means lakes, freshwater lakes and river systems. So this riparian buffer zone between the sea and the land, or the water and the land, similarly, whether it's an ocean, a lake, or a river, it depends on the bathymetry and whatnot of the base of the landscape. But typically where soft soils and waters merge, there's usually some movement of sediment. And so it's important for us to remember that erosion is actually a natural phenomenon, and it's meant to happen. It's how beaches and estuaries are formed and sandbars. And if we didn't have erosion, we wouldn't have very great beaches or estuaries or marshes. And so we need to be careful that we're not looking to stop nature from doing her natural design. And I sort of refer to it as Mother Nature. So she is in charge ultimately. And with climate change and how we've seen a lot of things change over the last 5 years, especially, we know that that's becoming more volatile, and we have to think about how are we going to readjust our mindset around what is a healthy landscape, and how do we, rebuild those landscapes that are wounded from either our own impact of humanity being development or rock walls or things like that, or is it a big Fiona type storm that comes in and does damage? And so our work is really focused on rehabilitating those riparian buffer zones, whether that means salty water or fresh, and really looking into which plants were there initially and how do we bring them back. Some plants, of course, have been with us for millennia, and their seeds are hopefully in the seed bank underneath our feet. And with the right all the right persuasion or the right temperatures, etc., we hope that they will re-nourish and regenerate on their own. But when they don't, we need to be able to bring them in and replenish them. And so it's quite a challenge sometimes to do that renourishment, because not all of the native plants, of course, are available at retail. And so we've had to literally take the reins and start doing cuttings and seed saving and rootlings and whatnot as well, to get these plants regrowing and back into the places where they're supposed to be. There's something else about the poop loop that we need to maybe have a quick chat about. The poop loop, of course, Dr. Elaine Ingham from the Soil Food Web organization, I think, coined the term. But essentially, it's that when the animals move back in, they bring seeds with them, they bring their manures, their nesting, their babies, eggshells, feathers, all these kinds of benefits back into the landscape. And the poop is probably one of those really impactful things because not only does it bring nourishment to the soil horizon, but those seeds, the fungi and bacteria that are within that poop is also so kind of fundamental to the beginning of life again. And when we see it, the landscape's really damaged quite heavily on the shore. It's really tricky to get those animals to move back after it's been harmed. So we work quite closely with the homeowners and pet owners in the neighborhood and whatnot to kind of keep those critters out of the way so that the native plant critter relationships can mend back without having dogs kind of leaping and jumping through the ecosystem after we've established it. So that's just sort of one sample of our little bit of work there on the shore. The next slide is just a quick chat about the importance of root systems. And I'm sure that roots bind soils together. They also provide sort of pathways for water and nutrients and things to cycle through, especially for annual plants or biennials that are dying off periodically. And then, of course, we know that they increase the infiltration rate quite drastically when we do have plants. So the idea that rain and wind actually are helping to compact the soil, especially on a sloped surface, is sort of a somewhat fundamental to the rate of erosion and whatnot, but they can push those little bits of dust and fine sediments into the cracks and crevices, especially on sloped surfaces. And then it becomes very inhospitable for seeds to germinate. And so we really need to work at keeping our soils soft and friable and able to provide the stuff of life. And then when they do, to protect them afterwards so that they are not dehydrated and losing minerals and water through that evaporation. And so there's some techniques and things that we do. And it's really important to look at that root to soil, root to root connection as well, where we really want the plants to sort of knit the soil horizon together so that we can slow down the rate of erosion. And that we'll talk about that in the next slide. So this is a little schematic we use a lot about infiltration rates in the buffer zone, and holds true for lakes and rivers as well. But we know that when the canopy is quite tight, we know the raindrop influence it has on raindrop impact and velocity of raindrops. But also in the wintertime in heavy snows. And locally, we've been having a lot of rain in the wintertime as well. So when the rain is hitting those unfrozen soils, they can really stimulate frost heave and then breakage from the shoreline or from the slope. Big chunks can be broken off of that. So the winter time is quite tricky, and we often encourage people to not have any open soil, so that if you do have open soil in your landscape, that before winter you're getting that covered, whether it's a hay covering or a coconut fiber mat or brush or more plants. And of course, the fall is a wonderful time to plant. So if you have open soil still left over from this summer's activities, I would highly encourage you to get those planted up before freeze up, which we know now isn't really happening until January. And if we get 8 weeks of good, solid frozen ground, that is probably all that we're getting. Down here on the South Shore in our region, I could dig all of winter except for maybe 3 weeks in January when the ground was pretty stiff. But other than that, it was pretty pliable here, and especially on the coast where we have a much more temperate system. But just in this little schematic alone, we can see that there's 40% of evaporation in a fully fledged ecosystem, and 50% infiltration with only about 10% runoff. And that's kind of the best case scenario. And that's what we're trying to improve, that our soils are hydrated, that they have capacity to harbor life, they're diggable for our critters, they have the connections between the soil labor layers and the plant fibers of the roots so that the soil food web can continue to live and thrive. And when we don't, we certainly have to do something about that. So I would encourage you to have a closer look at this schematic, print it off if you like. Of course, it's recorded, so you can get this recording from Bob, but if you want further information or a deeper dive, feel free to connect with me. So this is great, showing I think this is a red osier dogwood, and you can see the roots just growing freely out of those pots. So in about 2009, I got really annoyed with having to pay brokerage fees and all kinds of taxes when I was importing native plants, some from Ontario, some from further afield in Canada, Quebec, but I was also having to buy out of the States. And it just seemed ridiculous. These are plants for my own backyard, and I can't find them at a nursery anywhere. So 2009, we bought a couple hundred acres back behind Petite Rivière in the Crosstown neighborhood. It was an old clear cut, and immediately we started growing out native plants. So I had a little seed stock that I had been saving, started planting those. We started doing root cuttings, stem cuttings, seed saving, of course. And then because we're a clear cut and the previous owners had taken off all the topsoil, all the roots and everything, they cleaned it up, in big air quotes. The seeds were blowing in from the two really big forests beside us. And so wasn't too many springs along where all of a sudden we were noticing, oh, there's like 500 baby hemlocks all in a pod right here. And there's 200 little spruce, and there's, a whole field full of sweet fern showing up, and white birch and white pine. And it just seemed like it had been about 5 years since the clear cut had happened. And it took that amount of time for the naturalized seed that are still in the seed bank, or those that had blown in, to get to all the perfect right conditions to start germinating. And so we've taken the conservationist ethic of only 10% and to fix what you mess up behind you. So we do a lot of picking of seedlings when they're very small, usually only about 2 to 4 inches tall. Pick them, pot them, put them into raised beds where they grow out in mulched beds. And then when they're ready for sale, of course, we take them away. When we are harvesting off the land, it's about 250 acres. We know that 10% is about 25 acres if we were to completely denude 25-acre chunk. We've been working there since 2009, and I don't think we're anywhere close to 25 acres yet. Mostly because what we do is when we harvest these babies, we fix the soil with manures and leaf litter and hay flakes and brush. After we've done some digging, we do that reasonable sort of health check of the soil. And then we let that regenerate. And the seedlings that we pull out of there get potted up and planted in a raised bed that we build right in that space. So we're repairing the soil, but we're also keeping the seedlings right where they naturally germinated and started to grow, hoping that they will get their best life where they set themselves up. And so then, we just carry on throughout the woods like that. Mostly seed saving and mostly cuttings. But then from time to time we're digging, and we're also doing the root cuttings as well, which is super fun and fascinating, but takes a bit to get used to. anyhow, the roots are important and they are phenomenal. And I'm sure you've all read things like braiding sweetgrass and finding the mother tree. I'm sure you've seen Fantastic Fungi. If you haven't, you should put it on your viewing list. It's on Netflix right now. The other one that I would encourage you to watch too is called Symphony of the Soil. And Dr. Elaine is in that film. It's produced in the States, but it's a really great, both of them are really great videos to watch with this kind of science mindset of what's going on beneath our feet. So this is a really interesting schematic. I haven't found one with Nova Scotia plants, but this one's from Southern Alberta. And it just demonstrates the tenacity, the size of roots, the length. We could find this schematic for our own plants. I am working on building one for us, though, so that we can share that. But I think people just don't realize how the roots are, or the types of roots, or the capacity of them to do work for us. And I think that's really important that we create this new awareness and friendship with our plant community. Of course, with our greater understanding of Indigenous ways, we are often asked to think of the plants as kin. And yet somehow there's still this other creature that we haven't fully discovered yet. So I would encourage you to think of it that way and to really check them out. There's a beautiful root dictionary out there that comes out of Europe, and these plants are similar to the style the dictionary is written in. And you can see that, you know, some of these plants can be 20 feet deep if we let them. In some of our locations here in Nova Scotia, of course, we have very shallow soils, being the first to erode when those glaciers moved back. And so we have eroded a lot already. But the plants that I have been working with for these 23 years have just amazed me that even when they don't have the depth they require, so long as they have the breadth, the width of it, those long roots will adapt and go horizontally instead. I've seen so many plants living on very, very thin soil, rocky terrain, but amazingly healthy and tenacious plants. And as long as that volume of soil is there, that volume of nutrients, whether it's vertically deep in the ground or horizontally layered, it seems not to care that they really just want to live, and they're going to try and figure it out whichever way they can with those root systems. So ultimately, eternally grateful for good root systems for sure. So creating habitat then is really important. If we know the soil types, we know the ecosystem, we understand the sort of microsystem, the microzone that we're in, we should then be able to recreate a livable experience for the plants and the critters. And we want to be able to attract the birds and the wildlife along as we repair and renew this landscape. So right away, we're trying to put in structures that appease those critters, whether that's brush walls or wattle fences or, habitat mounds or teepees. We really want everything to kind of acquiesce and come back as naturalistic as possible. And we hope that that our work is doing just that. So it feels like we're on the right track. We'll see what more we can do. But if we can heal the soil system, we can identify what plants ought to be there, the critters that support the plants, and vice versa. And we can work in the design of the humans' desires and needs of those private lands, especially, but on community landscapes, having that collaborative nature that we can then speak to the community about a restoration project is really fulfilling, and encourage you all to get involved. And this scene here is, of course, of a brush wall. This happens to be down in St. Margaret's Bay, and is really quite a thriving ecosystem now that we've got it planted up and protected from some of the wind and whatnot. And yeah, you can see some of the early stages of the planting in that slide. So this is another meadow that we are in the process of restoring. And I should say that there are some lupins in there and some, non-native things that have cropped up. This was a mowed lawn for about 20 years. And we asked them to stop mowing it the year before the project was starting. And so we did do some primary digging of invasives as they poked up that first year of no mow. And then we had to get on with the job of planting up the meadow. So most of the projects have a management strategy that go with them, whether the homeowners are going to do the management or they bring us along, either for sort of consistent service, whether it's weekly or monthly or seasonally, depending on the diversity of the plants, but also if it's invasive species that we're trying to capture and get rid of, then we want to see them before they go to seed. So, yeah, so we do have a tendency to manage these landscapes until they kind of get on their own. And if the clientele are only seasonally present, then we often will have a off-season management plan as well. So when the clients are gone, we can go in there and do some more aggressive digging and then rejig the soils that we've disturbed, sift them, clean them, and then replant with appropriate species. So from time to time, we get, these volunteers that pop up. We didn't know they were there. They were seeds or distributed by a bird or whatnot. So we have to keep our eyes out. And of course, we're striving for all native. But certainly we have some of those heritage species that pops in or intruders that come with soil or other products that might enter the system. So we have a Shore Up program, which is our community-based coastal restoration project that we do at the community level. We work for homeowners. We have over 2,500 projects under our belt currently in the last 23 years. We've, in the last 10 years, we've been working more frequently with municipalities. And now that the Coastal Protection Act is not being enacted by the province, more and more of the municipalities are coming on board to either our upland dry projects to restore, forest edges or old fields or things, or doing restoration on waterfront as sort of normal. And we do these hands-on workshops year-round, as well as landscape design courses and pruning and seed saving and that kind of thing. In fact, if I can just put a quick plug, on the 25th, which is this Wednesday, we're doing a seed saving workshop at the Nova Scotia Nature Trust in Dartmouth. So we'll be in the backyard looking at the native and heritage plants that are in that landscape, saving seed, but I'll also be bringing seeds with me and samples of seeds in there, before they're out of their husk, so that you can recognize them from home. So we have a bit of a library that I'll bring with me, and that's happening 1 till 3 at the Nova Scotia Nature Trust. So hopefully we'll get to see you there. This is a project in Halifax at Birch Cove at Lake Bannock. It's across from the paddling center. And so the challenge here was that, of course, erosion along the bank of the lake, especially because the upland is quite heavily mowed in that neighborhood. We wanted to teach and empower the local neighborhood community that there are options for lack of diversity, lack of native plants, and then also for erosion. So we pulled those three focuses into this Lake Bannock job and increase the plant cover. Of course, they're not mowing there anymore. They had a huge issue with Canadian geese landing on the lake bank, and then all their manure getting into the lake. And this lake has been, dealing with E. coli and various bacteria for a couple summers now. And anyhow, this installation is meant to slow the erosion, create more entrapment for seeds and leaf litter and whatnot to be able to be caught up in that space. And then the native plants that we put into place for those to grow and mature and then set seed as well. So one of the great things that we do is to plant in 3 generations. So we're planting mature plants when we can find them at nursery level, or we're growing them out ourselves. Immature plants that haven't yet set seed, so they're maybe a year away from seeds, and then seedlings themselves. So there's 3 generations planted in any one installation year, and then we're repeating that depending on the complexities of the project for 3 to 5 years. And we have a management strategy in there as well. So these projects can be sort of continuous and ongoing depending on who's managing them. If it's a private landowner or volunteers, of course, then we're relying on the stewardship of the community to manage them as well. So that's Lake Bannock. And then the next slide is our U-Haul Beach project, where we were successful at creating a safe haven for the bank swallows. We know that they have lost about 98% of their population to date. And so they are endangered now, listed in as endangered in New Brunswick, but species at risk elsewhere. And so this project was really meant to allow for the bank to erode without losing any loss of land. It's quite tricky. Most times we're trying to stop erosion altogether. But here we knew that the swallows actually need some eroding cliff in order to manage their nesting and their protection from predators. And so we conjured up a really beautiful design where we could achieve both goals, allow for some erosion, but also replant the upland to perform as a native habitat rather than being mowed, to provide all those insects for these aerial insectivores, as well as protection from the bigger predators. So it was a really beautiful project. And if you have bank swallows in your area, please let me know, because we're trying very hard in all 3 provinces to protect their spaces where they live. Yeah, so that's enough about U-Haul Beach up in Bathurst, New Brunswick. So often we're working, especially on PEI, we're working on big slopes that are being eroded quite readily. We had a client who lost 50 horizontal feet from the crest back towards their house. And in fact, Fiona took the front of their house off as well. So people are at great risk on the shore and maybe don't realize, or don't believe, or just don't have enough information to make new decisions about where to plant their homes and how to protect their landscape. So this one client in particular had a developer had just been working on their land and took down all the trees. And so they had really no wind protection. And as that Fiona storm came by, it took 50 feet of their investment away, which is never fun to watch. And in fact, has destroyed their place to the point where they've just had to write it off. So we certainly want to bring more education to the community about climate adaptation and safekeeping of on the land, but also, you know, what else is being damaged while those developers and contractors are doing their work. Now, I don't want to make it sound like I'm poo-pooing those guys, but they often are impatient and don't want to, give way to trees when a machine needs to get in. So we have to be very careful how we manage them. But so far, we're teaching a lot and hopefully learning some good lessons along the way. This is just a slope straight. One is in PEI and the other is in Caribou River, and they look similar. But what our crew is doing there is trying to cover it so that the natural plants that are locked in that seed bank can find their way up. Just shows some more examples of some restoration work that we've done. The one on the left is a sort of driveway island where a lot of water seepage from the upland is kind of percolating through the slope horizon. And so this is quite wet and squishy island in the middle of this driveway, and we're turning it into more of like a wetland-esque type scenario where we have sumacs and cattails and irises and things, lots of bayberry and Rosa Carolina, Rosa Virginiana, tamaracks, some spruce, birch trees, etc., in this central oval of the driveway. It is an island by its very nature of being in the middle of a circular driveway. So the big trees on the outer edges that you can see, we've underplanted the shrub layer and then pulled forward towards the driveway more of the perennials so that there's only a sort of a 16-foot gap in that distance between where they hopefully will nest and where the big trees are for protection and cover. We'll see how that goes. And then on the right-hand side is another project. This one looks like PI as well. And this was a back bay. Uh, and so really bringing in all these plants, sometimes thousands and thousands of plants go into a landscape. And hopefully, all is well when we get them done. I love this picture because I'm cataloging this design, but you can see that we've tried to put a plant, a couple feet apart over that entire garden there. And the thing with restoration, I find, is that you can almost never have enough plants, and some of them coming in the form of seed and seedlings, small things. So these pots that you see is the mature and immature layer. Once those are planted, then the seed stock would have been spread and then mulched over as well. And so taking the time to plan and organize, but also to do the research in the background of that particular space, and then blend that with the dreams and goals and the focus of the homeowner, is a really interesting dynamic, sort of always in motion conversation that between myself and the other contractors, but also with the homeowner. And so I find it really interesting, different in a way than traditional landscaping, in that it's sort of you build it and you walk away. Maybe there's a bit of maintenance. But these restoration projects are sort of ongoing love affairs with the plants and the soil. And as the soil is amended and heals itself, you see the plants doing better. When the plants start going to seed, you've made some progress, and then collecting those seeds, sharing them, selling them, doing what we can with them, getting them back out into the public so they can be used by other people. And there's an organization I had mentioned earlier to Bob called the Atlantic Coastal Plain Flora. And often I'm connected with them doing talks or doing field trips. We are hoping to do a lakefront shore up next spring/summer in the lake. Do you know the Maliga Lake area? The interior here. And so we're hoping that we'll get to spread the word wide and that you'll all get invited to come to that workshop. Yeah, that's one of the great projects for next year. Currently, the project I'm deeply on right now is growing seeds from native perennials. They are so tricky, and if anyone has any tips, I would love to hear them. So that's the end of that quick little presentation about us and our work. And thank you for giving me the time to do so. And I'd love to answer any questions or have conversation with anyone that is still on the Zoom from this. Thanks so much.
I'm wondering about the use of what Bill Friedman used to call extra limitals, and thinking of in terms of climate warming and so on. I always find it interesting that there's a suite of plants that are planted horticulturally that in effect are kind of tests of extra limitals, which are plants like grow in North America, but beyond like Nova Scotia. And, with the climate warming and our loss of many species through exotic diseases and so on is just something I feel we should be thinking a lot more about, because we're losing species faster than we're gaining them. And a sensible place to get them, I guess, are things that might get here anyway, but more slowly. So I'm just wondering if that comes into your thinking about these things at all.
It really does. And we've had so many people come up from the States, especially during the COVID era and the Trump era, and gosh knows what'll happen if Trump comes back. But as humans migrate up, of course, they bring plants with them. And I find it very interesting to see them growing here when they're not really supposed to be here. But these plants have these limitations that we don't really know the boundaries of. We read the tags and they say full sun, part shade, zone 5B, 6A kind of thing. But realistically, they really want to live. And so they will figure it out, whether they mutate slightly or they start taking in different types of nutrients or whatnot. A great example I have is the almond tree. We started promoting food forests a couple years ago, and people were looking for nuts. And of course, we can do walnuts and heart nuts and things like that here, but almonds and pecans, we have them growing here in Bridgewater even. And the almond harvest is quite extraordinary here. The town trees are producing like bushel baskets full of almonds.
Wow.
And so, they're not supposed to be here, but clearly they can do so. And in the valley, there's massive nut tree orchards hidden away in the realms there. But we have also Maritime Nut Association. They have a Facebook page, so if people are interested, you could Google them and check out and become a member of that group. But these sort of limitations of the plants wanting to stretch and grow where they're maybe not normally supposed to be, but because the climate is shifting so quickly, I think our expectation is that more trees from the Carolinian forest system, more plants will start migrating this way. We'll notice it, I think, in the horticulture side with retail plants at nurseries. We'll see more and more of those coming, and more plants that can stay outdoors all year long or not have to be, like, I think about like rosemary and some of the herbs, the tarragon that are supposed to be patio plants here, and they die at the end of the season, but certainly they can stay over winter in some cases. So when I think of, our coastal plain flora and they're being kind of trampled by development, and then all of a sudden I see them popping back up, in little cracks and crevices that haven't been touched or that were touched but then ignored after development, and they find their way. The pink coreopsis being one for sure. I see her popping up as a real tenacious gal coming up, where it's been really trodden or it's been compacted by excavation or, machinery's been on it. And then a year afterwards, there she is again. So there's like this tenacity, right? That they really want to live. And I think that they're going to stretch their limits so that they can continue to do so. As long as the pollinators remain and we'll kind of move along with them, I think they're going to keep migrating. But I think that's a good thing in a way that we can see them having that resiliency that we're looking for.
Great, thank you.
I have a question, if I could.
Great.
Yeah.
Please.
I just wanted to pick your brain just a little bit. I volunteer for an urban park in Dartmouth, and it's forested. And there's a trail through the park, and there's crusher dust on that trail. So what happens when it rains, the crusher dust will wash off the trail and make its way onto the forest floor and destroy the native vegetation and accumulate and build up. So it's really had an enormously negative effect on our little forest. And so we're starting to kind of think about ways to restore the soil and the forest floor. So we've put log borders along the trail to prevent the crusher to help prevent the crusher dust from moving. So that was the first step. And we're moving into removing the crusher dust from areas that it shouldn't be on the forest floor. So we take the crusher dust up, and then we're adding soil, black earth. We're adding, and then putting a cedar mulch on top of that, and then putting leaf litter and branches on top of that. And perhaps we should also be adding some compost to the mix to try and just enrich the soil. We want those native species to colonize again, to come back.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so is it, we're on the right track, or do you have anything to suggest?
Yeah, I think that sounds really great. It's similar to what we're doing as well when we're harvesting out of our old clear cut. It's like granite till. There's not much there. There's not very good root latch. I feel like the plants are just kind of germinated and then they just stagnate there. So we're doing soil, manure, leaf litter, maybe some hay or straw, and then branches like evergreen browse, like gently laid on top. And if we have seed, then we're seeding it in as well and kind of stimulating that.
Right.
The other thing I would suggest, if it's been very compacted or if it's been deeply wounded, is a mycelium inoculant. Um, Often we're adding mycelium to fresh wounded soils and then putting these layers of detritus on top to try to stimulate the soil food web. We know that when the soil is compacted, the oxygen layer, there's not many voids anymore between those gaps in the soil globules. And the mycelium can help to kind of replenish and renourish. And then the protection of the soil helps it to kind of breathe again and lift itself back up and create those spaces. Mycelium too, like we have what we call abundance. It's our homemade seaweed and mycelium concoction, which is for sale as well if anyone's interested. But we often will lay that down first before we do anything else. And so water it in. And
Okay.
then your manure and seaweeds and leaf litter and like layers and layers. I'm also finding that thinner layers work better than thick ones. So if you think of like a really thin layer of, wood debris or thin layer of leaves, and so it's not too compacted and thick. Leaf litter, especially if it's too thick, and it rains on it, then it just digests deeper and deeper. And it's hard for all the oxygen and all the bugs and everything to move around. So that's helpful. One thing I heard in Lunenburg, we built a food forest at the Blue Nose Academy School, and people have found the jumping worms there, and we don't really know how they got there. So, yeah, really being cautious with if you're importing any kind of bugs from a retail venue, to make sure that those are really actually what they are. I don't know if someone dumped like their fishing gear there or, where these worms came from, but a couple, they have been identified there. So be cautious about those.
Okay, those are good
Yeah.
suggestions. Should I be concerned about we're using a natural cedar mulch on top of the soil that we're putting down? Should we a thin layer of that, or should we forget about that completely? What's your opinion on that?
Are there cedar trees in that forest?
Not really, no.
Okay, so I probably wouldn't use cedar mulch then. I might go to like a local vendor and see if you can get some mulch of local trees that would
Yeah,
be from that place. Yeah.
like a spruce or something like that, or
Yeah, yeah. Do you do any, is there any like forest management where you might be able to chip up your own mulch with dead
uh,
wood or anything?
not really. Not in
Okay.
a not. I mean, I could look into it a bit, but we're such a tiny park, and yeah.
Okay.
Well, we could. The city's kind of working with us, so in any case, yeah. But that's a good idea. I'll keep that in mind. Yeah,
Yeah. I would,
yeah.
yeah, try to stay true to the species that are most dominant there, because then you're really reflecting, natural branch drop, or if a tree was to fall down, then you
Yeah.
know, you're using that same material to put it back in place, that might work nice.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for the question, Sheila.
I'd like to ask about, I'm a private lot owner. I've got a small lake, fish lake. I've been having a lot of problems with my waterfront. So I'm just letting the local reeds and what have you move back in. And I'm just leaving, it's a large area that was mowed, is not mowed any longer. Now, when we first moved to the property, it was a wetland that meant that the lake wasn't usable. So that is why we filled it in. So, do you have any? You talk a lot about working with local homeowners.
Mhm.
Are you able to give advice to people like me?
Absolutely, for sure. Yep, I can do that here, or if it's a complex scenario, you can email me or we can have a phone call. I can come to your site if you're not too far away. We do site visits for a fee, because generally what we do is either record the site visit or you can take notes or I can do so. And then if there's any questions or any like follow-up research that I need to do, that's included in that. So it's usually about a 2-hour kind of situation, depending on the size of your plot. But normally I would come to you and do at least an hour on the site with you, take some samples, whether it's soil, plant, water, and then my research team and I would kind of digest the science around your site, and then whatever your focus and troubles or challenges are, then we would try to conjure up some sort of strategy for you. And that would be included in our site fee.
So what is your? I live in Oakfield, so I'm a fair distance away from you.
Yeah. So I would have to get the mileage from our Google Maps, but I could get back to you with a quote if you like.
Sure.
Okay.
And
So-
we had a lady from the Butterfly Way
oh, great.
giving us a presentation. And of course, when it comes to, she was also talking about native plants and pollinators. I'm a keen gardener, so I have a lot of non-native plants, plus a lot of volunteers
Uh-huh.
that are great for pollinators, but are certainly not native.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, there's sort of a spectrum, I think, from truly 100% native being really sort of idealistic, maybe on one end of the spectrum, to, you know, not caring at all. So somewhere in the middle, we all kind of land. And because I work for a lot of folks like yourself that have traditional gardens with, you know, traditional landscaping plants like spireas and potentillas and hydrangeas and things like this, I can't be a purist in the native realm because that's not my reality. I work with people who don't have only native plants. So the goal, though, is to be aware of that, firstly. And then secondly, to see if there's a way that you can transition. Maybe you love all those plants and you don't want to get rid of any of them, and that's totally okay too. They do have pollinator partners, even though they're not native. They may not have co-evolved with those plants over time in this location, but they do serve some value and some needs. And I think sometimes we're a little too strict with ourselves and don't want to have anything but native plants, but they're just not available that readily. So we're trying, and I'm hopeful that someday we'll have full option of, do I want all native or non-native, or somewhere in the middle, and make that okay. I think that we have a long way to go, though, because the plants are just not as easily available as the other plants. So it will be a while before we can really even conjure up an entire landscape that's purely native, right? I mean, there's so many things that have blown in or come in through horticulture or otherwise that have just been here for hundreds of years, and we think of them as being part of this landscape, even though they're not really supposed to be here. So, and that takes us back to the very first question, that those extra limitations that the plants can really stretch and try to grow in certain areas and certain daylight conditions, and really can change their genomes. In fact, we were working on the Magdalen Islands last fall, and some research had just been completed that there is a bayberry, Mirica, that is very specific to the Magdalen Islands. It has a separate genome markers than the bayberry that are in Nova Scotia or PEI or Quebec that surrounds it. These plants have completely become Magdalen Island plants and probably can't live otherwheres. I'm sure they can adapt as other plants do, as these ones have, to become very specific to the Magdalen Islands. And even the science has named them for the Îles de Madeleine, because they're so specific to that island. So, I mean, it just proves to us that things can change and things can morph and regulate and, change based on the environment for sure. But then the location and the soil types and the air and the saltiness of the water, all these factors, come into play. And so sometimes we are faced with, well, this plant is actually working really well for me. It has a food source, it has a pollinator partner, it lives within the ecosystem just fine, and it's not native. So, do we have a purity issue, or do we have a love of plants issue? Sometimes I can't tell which one is more proper. And I know there's people that kind of shrug and say, oh, I should only be native. But it's very challenging to be only native when they're not available. So one of the things I was talking with Bob about in the earlier session today was that, it gets really challenging to find all the native perennials. They're just not available. Or all the different shrubs, as trees, you can count sort of the top 5 trees at any nursery, but look for the oddballs and you just can't find them. So, I don't know the last time that I found like a striped maple at the nursery. It's challenging to find those guys, And so you do what you do the best you can until there's another alternative, and then you either adopt that new alternative or you stay stuck where you are. So, do we change and grow? Do we learn and adapt, or do we just stay stuck on one thing? I think we're all part of this group because we want to know more and we want to learn more and do more. So the only way we can do that is to ensure that the marketplace knows that we want those plants. And for myself, I went to Acadia University earlier this spring and said, what do you do with all your spare seeds at the end of the growing season in January, February, March? You're all the volunteers, the Friends of Acadia Botanical Garden are planting like crazy. The plant sale comes, they sell as many as they can. They sell some to other people, and then it's done for the year. Like, you have to start back at square one with those seeds. If you're out of seed, what do you do next? The seed bank up in the Arctic is not open to the public. We can't just call them up and say, send me, 1,000 more seeds. And so we need those seeds to come back into the public realm. And the way we do that is through the horticulture industry by demanding to have those native plants available to us. And I know I'm talking to my people at the government and saying, you've got to release more of the native seeds because they're just not available. And people are getting we're getting lost in the history of the lack of not having them, to the point where we're forgetting that they even exist. And so we have to speak up, and groups like us have to push the envelope a bit and speak to our seed librarians, and talk to the government, and talk to the MLA, and talk to the nurseries. And, we have to be advocates for our own needs. So it really is important that we know what we want, research it, and then seek it out. And that when we can't find it, that we inform our politic partners or our educational partners that we want these seeds available to the public. And hopefully we'll be able to figure it out, how to get them all here.
And I have something interesting called the double bloodroot. And I got it from a Rhododendron Society sale years ago. And I cannot find out whether, apparently the single bloodroot is native and is still found. And so I don't know whether the double bloodroot occurred as a natural variation of the single, or whether somebody bred it.
Ah, nice. Well, that's a good one to seek out. I'm taking notes as you speak, so I'm going to find it. I'm going to try and find it out. Thank you.
I have a question for you. Particularly around the Great Lakes, and that there's a history of the native population managing the environment and sort of tweaking, like not really with agriculture, but just sort of encouraging the growth of plants that are favorable to them, like nut trees and things like that. And I'm wondering, but I haven't heard so much of it out here. I've heard some instances where people talk about things like the Jerusalem artichokes you see in these fields everywhere, may be a history of being planted by native populations, hundreds of years ago. Or I've heard groundnut as another one like that. But I'm just curious, in your experience and just in what you're pursuing, have you run into, sort of management of the land by the Mi'kmaq locally or anything?
I haven't really. I have been in several conferences where the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq representatives have been there. I've been up like the Pictou Landing First Nations area, where they're trying to restore a shoreline there. And I know my own experience here in the LaHave River, that the eel fishermen are, the elvers are in the river here in LaHave, and that it's been very contentious in my own backyard with the fishers battling and fighting over their rights to have access to the fish year round, or to the eels year round. And those that have permits are very annoyed that they're wanting to do that. So it still seems like we're in a clash of whose right is whose. And here I've only really seen two maybe organizations, Pictou Landing, be, I want to say down Tobiatic Way, there's a spot there by the Wildcat Reserve that there's some work going on there. I don't know any like big public access ones that we could go and do some work with. Yeah, it's unfortunate. But I'm making notes here. I'm gonna look into it, and I can report back and see what's going on there, Bob.
Okay.
We had a couple years ago a lady called Rosmarie Taylor from Ontario, and she was working with the Earth Haven Learning Institute. She came to our local CD Saturday in February, and I think that would have been 2022 or 23. And she had just finished doing a book around native foods for the Eastern Canada. And I'll have a look on that and see, because there were definitely some references to some First Nations groups doing some plant work. So I'll look into that for you from the seed perspective, at least. So what I'll do, Bob, as well, is that I've got a couple of resources here that I will just share with you. And if you wanted to share them along with the group when you send out the recording.
Sure. Yeah, I
Yeah.
can website. Yeah.
Okay, great. Great. And then, I mean, if anybody wants to contact me for sure, please go ahead. I don't know if you all have my email or not, but you can certainly get it. You can email me directly from the website or use our Instagram or our Facebook. If you had any other questions or anything, I'm not sure. It's almost 9, so I don't want to hold you up too much longer.
Okay.
I'm fine, but if you, if anyone else wants any more questions, I'm happy to continue on, but I didn't want to take up all your evening.
Sure.
I have just a brief comment on the source of plants. It always annoys me when I see developers coming in and ripping out native vegetation that we don't get a chance to get in there or the city, anybody. Seems to me that we should have some kind of legislation that when they're clearing a natural area, that there's a period made available for people to go in and get native plants. Like that happens a lot around Halifax. Could be a tremendous.
Yeah, a tremendous resource, and what a safety net, to be able to actually capture those plants and save them and then transplant them somewhere else. I often, I have a few developers on my list and contractors as well. And so usually I'll touch base with them once or twice a season and say, just remember me, I'm looking for those native plants again or whatever. And if you have a couple days ahead, give me a ring and I'll come in and try and rescue some of them. And some will do that because I think they do know or understand that they have a greater value than we think they do. And so we have been able to go in and do rescues, which means then you have to then also have, a place to nurse them and keep them until you can heal them up and get them back out into the world. So part of why we have our big plant nursery is that we can do that. But it's really like the squeaky wheel kind of thing. You have to be the one to go and talk and bug them and, stop in where you see the signs going up or the fencing going around, find out who the site manager is and get in there before the big trucks move in. It can happen. I've done it plenty on private landscapes for sure. Public ones, I'm not sure because of all the liability issues and insurances and things. But if you knew where a place was going to be harmed and you knew who the real estate agent was at the very least, then you could probably find the developer's name and get in there. But plant rescues is a big deal, and it's where I get a lot of my plants because some of them just aren't available at retail, or you couldn't even grow them out at retail. They're so fussy that they need a very specific pH or hydration or whatnot. And that takes a lot of manpower and a lot of ingenuity to figure out how to have a system that is so specific to the different groups of plants and the different types of environments they need when they're in the greenhouse scenario. We do all of our growing outdoors because we feel like they like to be outside. Like I don't want to be under plastic with them. And but you do have to care for them in groups of ones that like lots of water, ones that don't, ones that only like water now and then, pH, soil texture, all these different components. So you end up with all these different kinds of raised beds and scenarios. And then the people who manage them have to understand when the watering happens and how hard and how, all those things. So it does add to the cost of the plants for sure, because they need such additional care compared to traditional sort of greenhouse plants that are pretty standard. So it does put some blockages in the way from some people being able to access them, but even just being able, the affordability of them too, they're more costly and they probably should be. They're more special than the sort of annuals, especially that come out of our greenhouse systems. But it's definitely an issue. And really, I mean, if we have 20 or 30 people in this society, if we all started talking about rescuing plants or getting seeds back out into the world, or just having chats with your local plant person or greenhouse or nursery person, you know, if we don't ask for them, they're not going to become available for sure. The market is very demanding, and that supply demand scenario is really what they're counting on from one year to the other. And they're making probably all the good money on these really disposable, easy plants because they have less labor attached to them. So to ask somebody to bring in, you know, some native perennials that might be needing more care, more attention, more TLC, they have to, you know, kind of balance their ROI as well. And do they have the staff that are knowledgeable enough to care for those plants until they're sold? Like, that's another issue. I mean, you see it everywhere, right? The 16, 17-year-olds at Canadian Tire that are running the plant section. And you're thinking, like, these plants are just in a desert here of pavement and they're never going to make it out, you know? Ah, so imagine with some beautiful bloodroot or ginger or some sort of very oddity, you know, how would they ever make it in that kind of big box retail?
Mhm.
It's going to be our specialty nurseries that are going to bring those in, or we're going to have to grow them out ourselves. Places like the Acadia plant sale is amazing, but it's one day a year, you know, and they work for months to make that happen. So, I don't know that we're capable of doing an all native scenario yet. You know, I think we're on our way, but
One place that I've had a lot of success, and I know you know them, Baldwin's in
yeah.
Fall. Yeah, they really, she's passionate, Susan Baldwin, about native plants. And I've noticed even over the past few years, she's bringing in more and more different native species. So Baldwin's would be a really good place to support, and not too far from, you know, HRM, kind of
Yep,
the
not
valley.
too.
Yeah, toward the
That's
valley.
right. And I mean, what a great drive anyway to get out there and check out Windsor and Fall River or Falmouth, have a nice lunch somewhere. We use Briar Patch as well. It's a little bit further down the valley in Berwick. Beneath the Boughs is a good one. Fernwood, I'm not even sure if he's still open. Fernwood is in like off exit 5, heading out towards Peggy's Cove. Ian was his name, and he was doing all native ferns. I mean, there's little gems here and there, and the native plant sale is really great to see everybody sort of in one place, but not everybody goes every year either. So sometimes you miss out on those opportunities. There's another young fella, his name is Mike Zifkin, and he worked for us for a year at our native plant nursery and then went out on his own. And his company is called Drumlin Hills. And so he's out New Germany way. And yeah, he's selling all native, grown by seed. So he's a really great guy to know. There's a couple other smallish ones around New Germany. There's oh, I'm trying to think now. There's one that just popped up on Wenzel's Lake. I can't remember what their name is, but yeah, just like a small scale. There's also Blackbird Hollow. Blackbird Hollow, they're doing like medicinals, but also some natives, and then also doing like nut trees too. And, you know, we don't have many nut trees, so it's kind of nice. I think when we look at permaculture and our food security issues, you know, from a food context, doing more of the things that you're going to eat every day. And with people who are gluten intolerant and, you know, have all these allergies and dairy intolerances. And so if the nuts can grow here, then you know, are they going to escape out into the world and take over? They need a little more TLC than that. So I'm not sure how we think about that. You know, are they intruders that are going to push out something else, or is there this sliding scale where we're losing some from the climate perspective and development perspective, and then others are just moving in to take that space that they've lost. can we pull those back in, or is it too late? You know, has the soil changed too much? Has the water changed too much? Is the air, is the pollinators gone? Like, when we start to look at that big puzzle and look at all the components that make for a healthy ecosystem, and especially a native ecosystem, you know, have we lost too much already? Can we reap them? Can we bring them back? Or do we have to find new things to replace those that have been lost? And is there a native alternative, or do we have to look to our Carolinian forest system or the boreal forest to kind of fill those gaps? I mean, the Acadian system is sort of those two smushed together anyway, you know? So can we borrow something from the West, Quebec, Ontario, and the boreal zone that might actually thrive here because something else has gone missing due to the climate changes, or from the South, from the Carolinian? So I think there's a lot of conversation around that. And I think each of us is going to have to make our own kind of what's okay for me and what's not okay. You know, we maybe have to make those lists and be a little gentle with ourselves too, I think sometimes. That's a lot to unpack in one evening. So
Well,
maybe I need to start attending
well,
more meetings and having more conversations with you all.
yeah, that's really, I have to tell you, I'm so impressed with the depth of your knowledge and, well, clearly just experience. I mean, you've been doing this for a while and it's clearly paid off. I mean, you understand a lot and obviously have you know, a good feel for what you're looking at and dealing with and all that. So I'm very impressed. Um,
Thank you.
and I want to thank you so much for sharing that with us. Um, yeah, we will have to stay in touch. I mean, I think also, as you were saying, you know, for people to get in touch with you individually and things, you're a tremendous resource. I mean, I've just been writing down names of other nurseries and things here that you mentioned already. So that's always a lot of fun. And I think I want to thank you so much for doing this.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure. And you know, as a passionate person working on their goals and dreams, I can get a little you know, it goes on. It goes on for a bit. So yes, thanks so much for having me. And yeah, if anybody wants to chat or tag along on one of our jobs or a rescue mission that we'll head out to some from time to time, stay in touch. We have a newsletter, a bulletin that goes out periodically. You can always email me or shoot me a text or anything if you like. And yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned I am a resource, and I've really cultivated our business to be that. We have a huge library. We have tons of files and plant lists that we've used at various locations. So if you're looking for any of that kind of information, I'm happy to help out. And then we do sell our services as well. So there's something else that I can't provide for free, I'll let you know what those fees are, and we can negotiate and compromise and make sure we can get to everybody that needs a hand. So in one way or another, I'm here to help out, and I look forward to connecting with you all sometime.